911. What's your emergency?
It's my neighbor, Bred, and his back door's open and there's blood everywhere!
Is he injured? Do you see him?
No, but his Komodo, it's still in there, and it's covered in blood!
Bred Anton was a private reptile keeper. He believed his Komodo dragon loved him, but when instincts took over, the results were unspeakable. If this story shakes you, if you believe there's a lesson in what happened to Bred, subscribe, like, and tell us your thoughts in the comments below. Bred Anton was not your typical reptile keeper. At 41 years old, he lived alone on a fenced half-acre property in Riverside County, California, where desert heat and isolation created the perfect backdrop for his private menagerie. But it was not snakes or lizards that fascinated him most, it was Komodo dragons. From the age of 9, Bred had been obsessed with these ancient, hulking predators. He'd hoarded wildlife encyclopedias, annotated VHS documentaries from Animal Planet, and even built a papier-mâché Komodo diorama for his 5th grade science fair, winning first prize. That early passion only deepened. In his 20s, he saved up for a once-in-a-lifetime trip to Komodo Island, where he watched the creatures stalk wild deer in eerie silence. It changed him. "I looked into their eyes and saw wisdom," he would later say in a YouTube interview, seated in front of a terrarium with heat lamps glowing behind him. "They're not monsters, they're misunderstood." He returned to the States with a mission: to raise one himself. Through a combination of exotic pet trade connections and what some suspect was an unofficial zoo backchannel, Bred acquired a juvenile male Komodo dragon at just under 2 feet long. He named him Rex. The bond, Bred insisted, was instantaneous. Rex was hand-fed raw chicken breast, massaged daily, and exposed to human interaction from the start. Bred's TikTok, which eventually grew to over 300,000 followers, was filled with clips of Rex waddling across the living room, resting his massive head on Bred's lap, or gently licking his keeper's outstretched hand. Captions like, "Just a big baby Jethro," and "He trusts me, that's what matters," flooded the comments with awe, adoration, and concern in equal measure. Friends, especially those from the local herpetology community, were more skeptical. One described feeling off every time they visited. "It wasn't just the size, it was the way Rex watched you, like he was thinking." There was an incident barely mentioned that should have been a red flag. During a backyard video shoot, Rex clamped onto Bred's forearm hard enough to draw blood. Bred laughed it off, uploading a clip titled, "Guess I'm on the menu now, wired." The wound required stitches, but Bred insisted it was playful, the equivalent of a dog nip. When a local news station profiled him under the headline, "Man lives with Komodo dragon," Bred leaned into the narrative of misunderstood genius, telling the camera, "Love overrides fear. Trust replaces instinct. He knows I'm family." The interview aired a montage of Bred lying shirtless beside Rex, his hand on the dragon's thick neck, smiling as if the ancient predator beside him was just another pet. No more dangerous than a golden retriever. To Bred, this wasn't hubris, it was proof of possibility. But to those watching from the outside, it was a ticking clock, waiting for instinct to outpace illusion. The warnings came early and often, but Bred Anton never listened. As Rex grew larger and his social media following exploded, a chorus of concern began to rise from the professional herpetology community. Comment sections on Bred's viral videos filled with skeptical voices. "This is not responsible keeping," wrote one user claiming to be a zoologist. "Reckless humanization will end in tragedy." The critique wasn't just online. A former zoo employee, who had briefly consulted on Rex's care, reached out to Bred directly, warning that the animal's behavior was shifting. "He's no longer approaching out of curiosity," the message read. "He's stalking, low posture, slow movements, fixed gaze. That's not affection, that's predation." Bred brushed it off, posting a sarcastic reply video holding a plush Komodo dragon and joking, "Watch out, he's gonna love you to death." But not everyone was laughing. A neighbor living 2 houses down reported to animal control that she had heard unsettling low hissing during the night and once saw what looked like dried blood smeared along the edge of Bred's wooden deck. The complaint went nowhere. Bred's permits were technically valid, but the incident was enough to disturb those who lived nearby. Behind the scenes, Rex was approaching a biological threshold few exotic pet owners understand. Komodo dragons reach sexual maturity around 5 years of age. At that point, territoriality, aggression, and erratic behavior are not anomalies, they are expected. And Rex was now over 5 years old. His body stretched more than 7 feet, and his instincts shown over millions of years were awakening. That's when Dr. Elena Travers entered the picture. A seasoned reptile biologist and outspoken critic of exotic pet ownership, she gave an interview after reviewing Bred's footage. "These animals are solitary hunters, not pets," she said, her voice firm but sorrowful. "A single mistake is fatal. You can't train out millions of years of evolution." Her words were clipped and shared widely, yet Bred never responded directly. Perhaps the most chilling incident occurred just 3 months before the attack. Rex broke through the wire mesh gate of his outdoor enclosure, roaming the property freely. Instead of calling authorities, Bred posted a video of himself casually leading Rex back inside with a slab of beef and the caption, "Rex just wanted some attention." Can't blame him. The video showed Rex brushing against Bred's legs with eerie calm, but if you watched closely, you could see it the calculating, deliberate movements of a predator not exploring, but assessing. The moment should have been a wake-up call. Instead, it became another piece of viral content. And that's where the dramatic irony takes hold. The viewer, now armed with hindsight, watches these moments with a knot in their stomach. The signs were not subtle. They were loud, clear, and growing louder with each passing week. But Bred Anton had convinced himself and tried to convince the world that love could overwrite instinct. As the tension tightened like a noose, the question was no longer if something would happen. It was when. In the final months of his life, Bred Anton drifted deeper into a dangerous complacency, mistaking Rex's growing size for a sign of maturity rather than menace. By then, Rex measured over 8 feet from snout to tail and weighed more than 150 pounds, his body thick with muscle, his claws leaving deep gouges in the wooden enclosure walls. But Bred, ever defiant, dismissed the signs. When friends noticed scratches on his arms, he brushed them off with a grin, calling them love marks and joking that Rex was just hormonal. It was a phrase he repeated often, as if the word could neutralize the reality of wild, hormonal behavior in a predator designed to dominate its environment. His increasing disregard for safety standards soon drew consequences. A local reptile enthusiast group, of which Bred had once been a respected member, formally banned him after an inspection revealed multiple violations: outdated locks, unsecured fencing, and failure to report recent aggression. Still, Bred doubled down. When a stray cat turned up dead in his backyard, eviscerated and half-buried near the enclosure, he blamed the neighbor's dogs. But one witness saw the truth. A woman walking her husky past Bred's property froze when she saw Rex through the glass patio door. "He lunged," she later said. "Full body force. The glass shook. I dropped the leash." Her terrified account never reached Bred's ears, or if it did, he chose to ignore it. He had other concerns, namely, Rex's size outgrowing the current habitat. Plans for a larger, reinforced enclosure had been sketched, half-funded, and posted online as part of a crowdfunding campaign. But weeks turned to months. Materials sat untouched in the corner of the yard, wrapped in plastic sheeting. Bred told followers he was waiting on a contractor, but neighbors say he was worried about the cost. In the meantime, Rex remained where he was confined, restless and stronger than ever. The last known video Bred uploaded before the attack would later be used in news reports. It showed him kneeling inside the enclosure, shirtless, holding a full chicken breast in his bare hand. Rex advanced slowly, tongue flickering, eyes unblinking. With the camera angled low, Bred smiled at the lens and said, "Still safer than driving in LA." The video ends with Rex's jaws snapping shut around the meat just inches from Bred's fingers. What the video doesn't show, but what can be seen if you pause at the right moment, are faint, rusty smears along the glass wall behind him. Blood. From what? We don't know. But it's there. A quiet, haunting detail that speaks louder than any caption. It's in these final days that the tragic arc completes itself. A man so deeply embedded in his illusion that every sign of every broken rule, every death stare, every drop of blood becomes just another moment in the fairy tale he's telling. And like all fairy tales built on denial, this one was heading toward a brutal, irreversible ending. It happened in the early afternoon under a sky bleached white by the California sun. Bred Anton, dressed only in athletic shorts and barefoot, stepped into the enclosure holding a slab of raw meat wrapped in wax paper. The cameras were off. This wasn't a planned video, just another routine feeding, something he'd done hundreds of times. He opened the gate, unlatched the inner door, and stepped onto the dirt floor. Rex was already waiting, massive and still, his thick tail coiled beside him like a resting serpent, his tongue flicking lazily in the air. Bred approached with his usual calm, holding the meat out to the side, not noticing the slight crouch in Rex's hindquarters. The lunge came without warning. Rex didn't go for the meat. He clamped his jaws around Bred's left calf with explosive force, serrated teeth sawing through muscle, veins, and tendon like paper. Bred screamed a raw, primal sound as his leg collapsed under him. Blood sprayed in short, pressurized bursts, coating the enclosure wall. He tried to stand, but Rex struck again, this time catching his thigh and twisting. It wasn't a true death roll. Komodo dragons don't spin like crocodiles, but it was the same principle. Destabilize, pull, bleed out. Bred hit the ground hard, his face slamming into gravel, his hands scrabbling for anything air, dirt, hope. The venom, laced into Rex's saliva, began working within seconds. His blood pressure crashed. Dizziness overtook him. His vision blurred, but he was still alive, conscious enough to crawl, leaving behind a thick, dark trail of blood that soaked into the soil. He managed to drag himself a few feet toward the gate before Rex caught up, stepping over him with terrifying deliberation. The dragon's claws raked down Bred's back, then his side, opening more wounds. At the fence, just outside the enclosure, a neighbor walking by stopped when she heard the noisy and awful wet thudding sound. She moved closer, cautiously, and that's when she saw it. Rex was circling Bred's body, his movements slow, methodical, deliberate. He was alive when I saw him, but just barely, she would later recount, her voice cracking. His eyes were open. He looked like he was trying to speak, but there was too much blood. She ran, screaming, dialing 911 with shaking hands. But when emergency responders arrived minutes later, they didn't enter immediately. They couldn't. Rex was still loose, territorial, and stained with blood. They waited behind barriers, tranquilizer guns ready, shouting into megaphones in vain. By the time they got incident early, 20 minutes after the call, there was nothing left to save. The enclosure floor was a mess of torn flesh, shredded fabric, and blood-soaked dirt. Rex stood over Bred's crumpled form, panting slightly, his tongue flicking as if nothing unusual had occurred. It was not rage, it was not madness. It was instinct centuries old, cold and patient. And in those final moments, Bred Anton learned the truth he had denied for so long, that no amount of love could silence the ancient hunger of a predator. By the time police and animal control finally entered the enclosure, the sun had shifted in the sky and a heavy stillness blanketed the scene. Officers approached with caution, tranquilizer rifles drawn, their boots sinking into blood-darkened soil. Rex had retreated to a shaded corner by then, his massive frame partially hidden behind a low branch, eyes open and unblinking. It took 2 darts and nearly 20 minutes for the sedative to take effect. Even unconscious, the Komodo's breath remained slow and steady, his chest rising and falling like the bellows of a machine. Paramedics pronounced Bred Anton dead at the scene. The coroner's report listed the cause of death as exsanguination due to multiple deep lacerations, compounded by venom-induced circulatory collapse. Simply Puth bled out, rapidly and agonizingly, as his body shut down from within. What made the tragedy even more chilling was what came next. Rex was placed into a reinforced containment unit and transferred to a high-security reptile sanctuary in Arizona, one of only a handful in the country equipped to house such creatures. News of the attack spread like wildfire. Within hours, social media split into 2 factions. One branded Bred reckless, arrogant, someone who played God with nature and lost. Others saw him as a misunderstood Sulin eccentric dreamer who dared to believe in connection beyond biology. A hashtag emerged, "Justice for Bred," but it didn't last. The media storm intensified when Dr. Storm Elena Travers appeared on national television, her tone grave but unwavering. "This is what happens when we romanticize predators," she said. "When we mistake tolerance for affection, these animals don't love us. They survive us." Her words struck a nerve, clipped and reposted by millions, often overlaid on footage of Rex being loaded into the steel transport crate. A week later, the autopsy report surfaced, and with it, an even more horrifying truth. Portions of Bred's torso had been consumed. Tissue analysis confirmed that bite patterns and stomach contents matched. The man who had fed Rex by hand was, in the end, fed to him by instinct. As the investigation continued, authorities searched Bred's home and discovered a series of handwritten journals tucked neatly into a locked cabinet in his bedroom. The entries were haunting. He wrote about dreams where he and Rex roamed the wild together, about how Rex would rest his head on his lap when he was sad. One chilling passage read, "I think he can sense when I'm depressed. He doesn't look at me like a lizard, he looks at me like family." The illusion was total. Investigators described the journals as a window into a mind consumed not by madness, but by a delusion nurtured over years, a dangerous rewriting of reality, where the predator had become a partner, the reptile, a friend. In the days that followed, Bred's home was sealed off. The enclosure was dismantled. The blood had dried, but the story clung to the walls like a warning. One man's dream, built on denial, had ended in the jaws of the very creature he thought loved him back. In the weeks following Bred Anton's death, the public fascination with his story gave way to a deeper conversation, one centered on biology, psychology, and the perilous line between love and illusion. Komodo dragons are not just large reptiles, they are apex predators honed by evolution to dominate their ecosystem. Their jaws are not built for chewing, but for tearing. Serrated like steak knives, they rip flesh in chunks, while their venom glands deliver anticoagulants and neurotoxins that lower blood pressure, induce shock, and accelerate bleeding. Once they bite, their prey weakens rapidly, often collapsing within minutes. Komodos are also opportunistic. They'll scavenge or hunt, depending on what presents itself. In the wild, they've been documented consuming up to 80% of their body weight in a single feeding. For a 150-pound Rex, that meant devouring over 100 pounds of meat in one sitting. Even more concerning, experts explained, is how these animals respond to environmental cues like mating season, food scarcity, or confinement. Their behavior becomes erratic, more reactive, more dangerous. What may seem like affection resting beside a keeper, nudging their hand, could easily be latent predatory assessment. Dr. Carla Mendez, a behavioral ecologist, was blunt. "You cannot domesticate instinct. You can only delay it." She cited other infamous cases: chimpanzees mauling their owners after years of apparent companionship, captive tigers turning on trainers mid-performance, even bears raised from cubs attacking during feeding routines. The pattern is almost always the same. A human convinced that their unique relationship would override millions of years of primal coding. It's a psychological blind spot called anthropomorphism, projecting human emotions and intentions onto animals. In exotic pet ownership, it's not just common, it's lethal. Bred Anton's story became textbook. A man who mistook tolerance for trust and curiosity for affection ultimately misread the warning signs, not because he lacked intelligence, but because he'd rewritten the animal's nature in his mind. Within the sanctuary where Rex was relocated, handlers approached him with the seriousness of dealing with a loaded weapon. "He's calm," one staff member said, "but you never forget what he is. He's not evil. He's not a monster. He's just what he is." That statement struck a chord with viewers, a chilling reminder that nature doesn't require malice to kill. On exotic pet forums, Bred's name became both rallying cry and cautionary tale. Some users defended his passion, insisting he was one of the few who truly understood his animals. But others posted his videos as warnings, pointing to the scratches, the blood, the glass lungesol, the signals that had gone ignored. Even now, debates rage in comment threads beneath old clips of Bred and Rex, but the experts are united. No matter how gentle a predator appears in captivity, it remains hardwired to respond when instinct awakens. You can train it, you can love it, but you cannot change what it was born to be. And when that truth collides with human denial, tragedy is not just possible, it's inevitable. In the end, what killed Bred Anton wasn't just a Komodo dragon, it was a perfect storm of ego, denial, and a tragic misunderstanding of what nature is and isn't. He wasn't a villain. He wasn't a fool. He was a man who desperately wanted to believe that his love could tame the wild. His social media still live in the days after his death, read like a chronicle of this fatal faith. One post stood out, a selfie of Bred grinning beside Rex, the dragon's tongue mid-flick, captioned, "I trust Rex more than I trust most people." The irony is gut-wrenching. That trust, so confidently declared, was never mutual. Trust implies reciprocity, but Rex was incapable of it, not out of cruelty, but because he was never designed to return the emotion Bred projected onto him. He didn't betray Bred. He simply acted on instinct when the illusion cracked. Today, the enclosure stands empty. The blood has been washed away, the bones removed, but the space echoes with absence. The walls still bear the deep claw marks where Rex once paced. The soil is stained darker in places where no amount of scrubbing could fully erase what happened. Visitors sometimes walk past the property, glancing at the locked gate, the tarp-covered remains of the enclosure, and they whisper. Some speak with sorrow, others with judgment. But all agree it was avoidable. The broader moral looms large. There is a cost to loving something that cannot love you back in the way you believe it can. Not every bond is mutual. Not every creature, no matter how closely raised, can be rewritten by affection. And when love is one-sided, blind, and built on denial, it stops being love and becomes something far more dangerous. We want to believe in the fairy tale that the lion will lie down with the lamb, that the predator will become a companion, that we are the exception, but nature has no interest in our exceptions. It only has rules. And those rules, when broken, collect payment in blood. In Bred Anton's case, the payment came swiftly, brutally, and publicly. His death was not just a tragedy, was a mirror held up to every person who's ever let emotion override biology, who's ever said, "It's different with me," and believed it. So the question lingers, whispered across forums, echoed in expert interviews, and etched into the final seconds of Bred's life. At what point does affection become delusion? The screen fades to black, but not before showing the last known photo of Rex, eyes like twin obsidian stones blinking in the sunlight. Then a montage. Bred's smiling selfies, Rex curled beside him, the two of them bathed in golden light, and finally, the locked enclosure gate. Silent, sealed, final.